We're beginning Chapter 2 now, Part 1, starting on page 23 here. And these are the basic concepts of chemistry, and then we'll proceed to biochemistry once we get through these basic physical chemistry ideas at the beginning of the chapter. And dealing with matter. Okay. They come in several forms, matter does, as gas, liquid, and solid, sometimes interchangeable from one to another depending on the amount of heat involved. So we'll take a look at that. States of matter here are listed as solid, liquid, and gaseous. We actually utilize this to our advantage by secreting liquid water on the surface of our body, allowing it to evaporate. And we get some caloric burn off. As a result of that, we release energy, so we cool off a little bit. Okay, then when we're thinking about energy, we're thinking sometimes about food energy, for instance, and we consider energy the force that we use to do work with. Work equals force through a distance, and one of the ideas that you might consider is that it takes about 100 food calories to walk or run 1 mile, and that's if you're about a 150-pound person. You get a little less burn if you're less than that. You get quite a bit more burn if you are larger than that, but it's a mass through a distance. So that's the idea, mass. Here we're saying force, but I should use the term mass here, through distance. Okay, so let me write that down, mass through distance. Okay, and then kinetic versus potential energy. Kinetic energy is energy as heat in the universe, basically, and we're living at sea level, and the standard for sea level is 25 degrees Celsius, which is a little warm on average. It's not body temperature, but it's up there. And then potential energy is a stored situation, which we utilize particularly in our nervous system. So, and we can measure that in millivolts. Once we have an action potential, the how shall I say, the channels open. There's the movement of ions, and the ionic movement causes electromagnetic force to proceed and open channels downstream. So we start with potential energy, we move to kinetic energy, and since there's always kinetic energy available, we're not at absolute zero. That means things can happen slowly, but they can happen, right? And we'll take a look at that when we look at things like the diffusion and dispersal of dissolved particles in solutions. So what kind of energies are involved here? Chemical energy is commonly found in food nutrients. We have high energy molecules, food nutrients, which we metabolize into constituents to make, how shall I say, structure, as well as tools or active proteins within our body. Enzymes, for instance, are made from these nutrients, as well as signaling molecules like hormones. Okay, so we can store some of this chemical energy in a high state bond with regard to ATP. It's a triphosphate, specifically an adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so we can break that down into ADP, diphosphate, and a break off a phosphate ion, and there's a resulting energy from that. We can form ATP from glucose, the energy molecule that's most common in the body, and one glucose molecule will yield 38 ATPs, ultimately with a complete metabolism. We have electrical energy by way of our muscles and our nerves. The surface of these cells are arranged in a way for ions to cross over the membrane and to create energy flows, electromagnetic flow. Sometimes we can use that to develop mechanical energy. We'll take a look at that with musculature, how to get a muscle to contract and thereby do work. Okay, so that would be mechanical energy. Radiant energy is something that we get from light. We're able to power the receptors of our eyes in that regard, and we can perceive the world around us to some degree with radiant energy. Okay, so there's other species like plants, green plants, that utilize this for the production of glucose from carbon dioxide. Okay, so we have conversions, and we'll consider that idea as time goes along. Then we're going to be considering here the elements from the periodic table that might be commonly found in the human. And to make a carbohydrate, you need carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And then with the addition of nitrogen and the amino group, we can make actually amino acids and proteins. So the body is made out largely of, at least in the soft tissues, various kinds of proteins. And then we're also going to be utilizing calcium and phosphorus in the matrices of bone, as well as in cartilage, in order to create a hard connective tissue matrix. We're also going to be, of course, using phosphorus in ATP production. We're going to be using potassium as the electrolyte most common inside of cells, most common outside of cells, and in the bloodstream is sodium. Okay, magnesium is an important electrolyte, particularly for the synthesis of protein, particularly collagen. If you were to abstract the entire body except for its collagen, there's so much collagen in the human body that you would actually continue to recognize the person for which you've done that abstraction. That's a lot of collagen. That means a lot of magnesium. Magnesium is a coenzyme along with vitamin C for the synthesis of collagen. We need iodine for the production of thyroxine. It's an energy-oriented kind of hormone that maintains a metabolic rate in the human body. Then we have iron, which is actually a toxic molecule in the body, except when it's used to make hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is how we move oxygen through the body from the air and then to each of the cells that require oxygen. So that's an interesting idea. It's important to note that we came to the, how shall I say, that oxygen was not an original player to a large degree in early life forms in the billions of years ago. And then when photosynthesis became prevalent, oxygen became a byproduct of photosynthesis. It's actually a waste product of the production of glucose. And the atmosphere filled up 1/5 of the way with oxygen. Oxygen is very toxic, actually. So it's somewhat miraculous that, how shall I say, life or nature made the segue into creating species that required oxygen as a nutrient. Sort of a wild and crazy idea that you would change a toxin into an essential nutrient. And in fact, it's the most essential nutrient for humans is oxygen itself. So all of our cells really require oxygen on a minute-to-minute basis, and we can't be without it. So that's quite a kind of a stretch that occurred over time in the development of life. Okay, here they're showing us a table on page, that's page 29, the difference between a solution, which is a homogeneous mixture, a solute with, or a solvent rather, with one or more solutes. We can think of gas in that regard too. We can think of oxygen as being one of the solutes in air, the solvent of air being actually nitrogen. Here we have a sol-gel situation where at a low temperature we have a gel-like formation. They're actually using Jello here. If you were to heat up Jello, take it out of the refrigerator, put it on the stove, it will actually melt into its solution state. Here we have something a little bit different, which is a suspension. Blood is a suspension of formed elements along with the plasma, which is more or less a solution.